He was sitting in the driver's seat, and we know that he was shot from outside of his vehicle.
I'm Phil Martino.
And I'm Madison Fitzpatrick. We're back for another season of Tracking a Killer, The Cold Case Files. We are turning up the heat on 8 unsolved homicides, including the decades-old Margaret McWilliams case out of Toronto.
That was normal that she would go out either bicycling, she'd go walking, she'd go jogging. The cause of death was ligature strangulation.
And we're taking a closer look at the 1990 disappearance of University of Toronto student Elizabeth Bain. Her boyfriend was wrongfully convicted of her murder. Now, a class at the University of Guelph is examining police files on the case.
As far as I'm concerned, the more eyes, the better.
Listen to Tracking a Killer, The Cold Case Files on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a critic, consultant, and programmer based in Toronto, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Paris Barclay, a veteran director and former president of the Directors Guild of America, whose CV includes the 1996 spoof Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood, and episodes of pretty much every memorable TV drama of the last 3 decades, including ER, The West Wing, The Shield, House, Lost, Sons of Anarchy, and dozens more. His latest project is a documentary, Billy Preston, That's the Way God Planned It, about the remarkable rock and soul performer who should have been a much bigger name than he was. After months on the festival circuit, it kicks off its theatrical run this Friday at Film Forum in New York City, and you should see it. Paris picked Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Stanley Kramer's 1967 dramedy for the Civil Rights era, starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn as Matt and Christina Drayton, a well-to-do liberal couple whose 23-year-old daughter Joey, played by Hepburn's real-life niece Katherine Houghton, announces she's engaged to a widowed doctor in his late 30s. He's perfect on paper, but there's one little thing. He's black, and the idea of an interracial marriage is something they can't quite accept, even when that black man is played by Sidney Poitier at his most charismatic. And while its reputation has dulled over the decades, you'll find its themes are still pretty relevant in contemporary America, and Paris has plans to remind everyone why. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, I have been studying Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with great intensity for about the past year because Karen Kramer's widow asked me if I would be interested in developing a miniseries based on it. Huh? And because of that, I've probably read 10 different books about it from the various principles. We've done a lot of development of the story. So it happens to be a film that I not only love, but I also have a somewhat encyclopedic knowledge of. So I thought that would be interesting for your listeners to hear.
I think that's fantastic, actually. What I was about to say before we started recording was that the film's reputation has kind of been diminished over the decades, not the least of which because every other attempt to remake it or rework it has been unsatisfying. But I think the thing that everybody misses, and the question I most want to ask you about your project is, would you do it in period? Would it happen at the same point in time? Because that's what seems so electric about the 1967 film that exists as a document, right? Like, it is a snapshot of everything that was happening then.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be in 1966 and 1967. But I think part of the reason why its reputation may have faded is because people are looking at it through the eyes of today. Mm-hmm. And yes, through the eyes of today, it may seem like a dated story. And you may say, well, so what? This young white woman wants to marry Sidney Poitier. Who wouldn't want to marry Sidney Poitier? But back in the day, in 1967, when people forget, this kind of interracial marriage was illegal in 17 states. I mean, and frowned upon in most of the others. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that you would bring this person home, it's not now. It's not at a time when, every neighborhood has its own group of interracial parents and their kids running about. It's about, the struggle in 1967 for civil rights, which was brewing and about to burst. By the time the film came out, we had the summer of 68 and all of the different riots over race issues in the time. And if you don't know that history, then the whole thing seems a little quaint. But if you do know the history and you do know that the Loving versus Virginia case was happening at the same time that they were making this movie, I mean, that was a pair of people who fell in love, one white man, one black woman, and they married, but then they found out that their marriage was illegal and denied, and that has a certain relevance to today. So they went to the Supreme Court, and all of that case was playing out as they were making the movie. And actually, on the last day of filming is when I think it was 2 weeks after filming, it was the day Spencer Tracy died. They discovered that the Supreme Court had overturned the laws that said that their marriage was illegal and made it legal for people to be married across races throughout the United States. So it has an important place in the history of our country too, which I think is part of the prism that I look at it through.
The film was included in one of the Columbia Classics 4K boxes a couple of years ago. And so that was the last time I had seen it. And that would probably be a good 15 years after I'd last seen it. And what struck me about it then is that so much of Stanley Kramer's thing. As a director, he was chasing issue pictures. He was always making grand statements, and he was always making sure you understood just how grand those statements were and how important and relevant his films were. The movies themselves could be really square, but Guess Who's Coming to Dinner has this weird, it's not chemistry. It's more like an agitation in there. And it's Poitier. It's this stentorian presence of this actor playing a comic role. Like he's ahead of everyone else in the movie. The big twist of the film, such as it has one, is that he's just a little more conservative than everyone else. That he's the one who won't sleep with his fiance until they're married. She wants to, and he won't. And part of that is in Poitier's performance, there is this great kind of slyness to it. Like he knows what's expected of him, and he absolutely refuses to play into any stereotype. But at the same time, in 1967, how do you make that movie without knowing that a Black character in this world is not allowed to step wrong, right? Like everybody's sort of waiting for him to make a mistake or overreach. And that tension, it's not in the script, it's just in the performance. And I found that so fascinating.
That's a really interesting perspective. And that's something I haven't really thought about as much as I should have, because I'm focused on the fact that when Poitier enters this picture, he's the biggest box office draw going. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had made to Serve with Love, he had made In the Heat of the Night in the same year. And now he's getting ready to do yet another picture where he's, the primary shaker and mover of the drama. So he's in a rarefied position for a Black man in the world. And he's Sidney Poitier. Yeah. And so just his entrance into the movie sort of tilts the scales. So how do you balance that? So Stanley Kramer very cleverly said, I will get Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, two of the biggest stars of the generation, who happen to be his friends, to be his parents, and now I have a movie. And in fact, he got those three, at least he said he got those three to the studio and got the picture greenlit before he even mentioned that it was about an interracial romance, or they saw the script. It was enough to have Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn and Sidney Poitier in a movie. They said, okay, we'll give you, I think it was $3 million or something at that time to make that movie. And he kept the script from Columbia until they were in production. And it was probably a good thing, because when he gave them the script, they shut the production down. That's part of the reason why we want to make a movie about it, because it is a little bit about, the marriage, interracial marriage, and how it broke through in the mainstream, and how Stanley Kramer's work has always dealt with social issues with different kinds of tones. And this is a very different tone than usual, because it's a romantic comedy drama sort of thing, which is, he didn't really step on that, so many fences with his feet all across them too often. And it displeased a lot of people, including the studio. And so it was a struggle to get it through. So part of the fun of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and people say, oh, it's so dated. It was a struggle to get it on in 1967. Even with those stars, it was a struggle to have that happen. And so I think some of the characterization that you referred to of Poitier comes from Kramer insulating himself from criticism. I mean, he is, again, a perfect Negro. I mean, the character of John Prentice is perfect. I mean, he's a widower, which maybe makes him less than perfect, but for this situation, it's kind of good because he's had some experience. I think he's dealing with the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
He's kind of brilliant. He pays for his long distance phone calls that he makes. I mean, he's very, very well spoken and passionate and lovable. And so that helps us to say, well, why not him? Oh, the problem is he's Black. Oh, I get it. When that's the only denominator, then it becomes a really dramatic thing. So I hope that gets to your question, which is it's a genius act. It's a genius tightrope that he walks, and using not just the Blackness of the character, but Sidney Poitier to portray the character is a choice that he makes very deliberately, and knowing what impact that will have on the film.
I think it is the first film that Poitier made where his stardom is as important to the character as the character he's playing. Like, it's a John Wayne role. When he shows up, that's John Wayne. I know what's going to happen. And here he's inhabiting this perfection, this idealized perfection, which is kind of the persona that's been thrust on him as the first Black actor to have the level of success he'd had.
I think it's a persona he chose too. I don't think it was just thrust on him. I think it's what he wanted to present.
Yeah, I have to admit, I just don't know. I know his story and his work, but I don't know the background well enough to really.
Well, I do, so I'm here to help.
Yeah. Oh no, by all means.
Sidney Poitier was such an extraordinary actor. He'd already won the Oscar by this point for Lilies of the Field, and so he deliberately chose roles that would present Black people in the best possible light.
Right.
And that's what he wanted to do. That's why he chose In the Heat of the Night, because he knew at some point he would stand up to this white sheriff. He knew that that's what he wanted to put out there in the world. He felt there was enough of, negativity and enough of stereotypes that he could break them with intelligence and with his fierce ability to communicate, which is something Sidney Poitier gained. But by this time, by 1967, people were getting tired of it. At least Black people were. And that made the film very interesting because while he has this currency as the perfectly acceptable Black man for white America, Black people were going like, is that you're going to keep doing that? I mean, really? I mean, I think Spike Lee or someone mentioned that he was sort of a magical Negro in this time, and his magical Negro-ness was starting to wear on people, and he began to get criticism. He even got a savage critical article in the New York Times that came out this year, which used the N-word and somewhat profusely in the New York Times, describing it. I mean, you got to look it up because it'll blow your mind to say, that's not my New York Times. Well, that was the New York Times then. And I think it was titled, Why Do White People Love Sidney Poitier So?
It does sound like something.
So that question's out there. So it's not quite as clean as him, being the Sidney Poitier icon that helped this movie, because he's also the icon who's struggling with a backlash or maybe a blacklash against him at the same time. And is he going to change direction? He didn't really do it.
No. Well, he moved into directing himself, right? Like that was his excuse. That was his way through.
Rather than to keep portraying what he wanted. But meanwhile, he kind of changed the world because he inspired Denzel Washington, and he, he set a whole thing in motion that became, a significant movement of Black actors and Black directors into the mainstream. And Sidney Poitier made that possible with his perfection.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing about his performance in this movie as well, like that he just radiates confidence and charisma, is how terrified he supposedly was to take the gig because he was worried he wouldn't measure up to Tracy and Hepburn.
Yeah, that's well documented. In fact, even in some scenes early on, he asked that they be sent home. And he asked that he just read his lines to a chair, script supervisor, because they threw him off his game. And he was very intimidated by them, which you don't think Sidney Poitier was intimidated, but he stands up to, Rod Steiger. But with Tracy and Hepburn there, he thought, maybe I'm out of my league, which I think makes him kind of wonderfully, approachable, human. Yeah. I mean, even Sidney Poitier can be thrown. And so eventually he did overcome that, and eventually they did embrace him, and the movie went on. But just to think about those scenes, those original scenes with them, I just wonder what Kramer was thinking to himself, like, have I made a mistake? Should I have just gotten some generic Negro to play this part? But he was friends with Sidney, and there's no way he'd make this movie without him.
Well, yeah. And also, of course, Tracy is actively dying. So there are all of those considerations. They could only shoot his scenes from 9 a.m. to noon, so he could rest for the next day. There were days, I think it was Kramer who was quoted as saying there were days that they couldn't get anything out of him, and then there were days where they got the best work out of him. But it was always a crapshoot.
Yeah, and the film that I'm developing that talks about what sort of hoops Kramer had to jump through just to get Spencer to do this. Spencer was not an easy, he was virtually retired, and he had to be convinced that this movie was great enough and strong enough for him to sort of come out of that most retirement and do something. And he didn't have anything to read because Stanley hadn't really written anything. But when he did, Spencer's thought, okay, I can do this. And Catherine helped him. Catherine said, if we're going to do one movie that may be our last swan song, let's go out with this. Let's go out with this, the love that's expressed in this film. And so that made it really interesting too. And just one other thing about him dying. I mean, there's dying and then there's dying. He had so many ailments, emphysema and liver disease and diabetes, and he was taking all sorts of medication and probably some barbiturates and other stimulants at the same time to sort of deal with his, he had always been an alcoholic and was always struggling with alcohol. So this is a man who was just being held up by, invisible glue. And yet Stanley Kramer and Katharine Hepburn managed to sort of lift him up and carry him through this movie so that last speech, that last monologue, which I think is like 4 pages in the script, he could do, but it took 6 days. I mean, he could do it, but it took some time. And when he was tired, he went home. But eventually they got what is, I think, a magnificent performance from him. That is probably one of the iconic performances Spencer Tracy has ever given.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the Criterion Collection's gorgeous new 4K edition of Jacques Tati's Playtime, and covered Nirvana the Band, the show, the movie, Cold Storage, and Montreal My Beautiful in my regular Friday dispatch to paid subscribers. You could be one of them. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I should apologize. I thought you were talking about a miniseries that was a remake of the story, not the making of the film.
Oh, no. We're going to talk about the making of the
That's way
that's
more
what's really interesting. I mean, the story in and of itself is interesting because of all the parallels it had to what was really going on in Stanley Kramer's life. And he had just met his, wife, Karen Kramer, Karen Sharp at the time, and they had fallen in love just before the movie began. So there's lots of things that influenced the writing of the movie, but the story I'm really interested in is how it all came together and all the love stories that were entwined with that. I mean, Sidney Poitier had broken up with Diane Carroll, who was not his wife. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn are living together while Tracy is still married to his wife. And, and they bring in none other than Katharine Hepburn's niece.
Right.
To play Joe, the young lover. It's her niece. I mean, that's before Nepo baby was a common term, but she delivers a good performance and she does have a resemblance to Catherine. So it has a lot of behind the scenes machinations that made it super interesting. Aside from the fact that the studio didn't want to make it.
Yeah, that is fascinating that you can have legitimate superstars of the era and of previous eras, and a filmmaker who has a track record of drawing audiences to difficult material, and then somehow, this one feels like this little domestic picture, which could just as easily be a stage play on 3 locations. This feels like it's too far. Yeah,
this is going to break Columbia Studios. I mean, they were really afraid of, and it's not unreasonable that it wouldn't play in 17 states, that the advertising and the company would be targeted with hate mail, which eventually they were when the film came out. I mean, their fears were not unjustified, but mostly they just didn't think it would sell. I mean, they just didn't think, even with those stars and even with Poitier's clout, that this movie would actually sell tickets. And boy, were they surprised, because it became their biggest grossing hit to date.
Yeah, which again it's a great validation for the project, but it also just tells you how badly it was needed in the moment. Like just how many people needed to see a movie like this, because this is still, if I've got the timing right, this is still a year out before the first interracial kiss on television, which is an episode of Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
And those characters are forced into doing it. Kirk is possessed by aliens and forced to kiss Uhura, and William Shatner has to pretend he doesn't want to. And that's the level of discourse, right? Like that's where the conversation is. Whereas it's also inarguable that interracial relationships have been going on since the beginning of racial awareness, let's say. I mean, like people will always fall in love with other people, especially handsome, pretty ones. You know, like that's inevitable.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the lesson that Guess Who's Coming to Dinner teaches us. These two incredible specimens belong together. But it is bizarre to think, even now, even in this moment of like seething racism, everything is back on the table, and people are delighted to be able to call each other names and act on these things. The internet has enabled all this anonymous loathing and hate, and the pandemic didn't help because it sequestered everybody and then unsequestered them in a way that, like, all of these things were in this perfect storm for the resurgence of the civil rights era, only uglier and with more automatic weapons. And somehow this movie was perceived as a bridge too far. I keep coming back to that because now you look back on it and it's almost anodyne. It's sweet. It's about, it's just about being honest with each other about the things that matter. And
but I think it's the other thing that it did that I think is easy to forget is it brought an issue to the fore and into the conversation that people really didn't want to face. And they didn't really want to talk about it. They didn't want to, even liberal people like the parents that are played by Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn are shaking and quaking at this prospect. And so this brings it right into their face and says, what are you going to do? And it's one of the reasons why I love Stanley Kramer and I love telling this story, at least the story of making of it now, because now is the time when we do have to stand up. And now is the time that we do have to present the stories that we care about, even if they're about delicate things that will make people upset. It's the time. It's the time to challenge people. And it's time, as Bad Bunny would say, to challenge them with love. You know, that hate is bigger than love. And so let's put out how love triumphs. So in its sort of anodyne gloss, it's another Stanley Kramer message movie. And the message movie is going to be, we're going to be okay as long as we can master tolerance. We're going to be okay as long as we can actually see the glory of love, which is the song that starts the movie. We're going to be okay as long as we let people live and let live. And so I love telling it now. And I love telling them the part of the story where it was shut down. They just said, no, we're not going to do it after they'd already started filming, because then that gets me to Jimmy Kimmel. That gets me to companies being afraid of artists who are too outspoken. And this is considered too outspoken. It doesn't seem so today, but it was then. And how that fear can sometimes just say, let's cut, let's run, let's not take the chance. Fortunately, they did sort of come to their senses. And by the time the movie was ready to be released, if you've ever seen the poster, it features them, the lovers, I think they're arm in arm, and it calls it A Love Story for Today. So in the end, they leaned into the controversy to Columbia's everlasting credit. And that's a big step. They just said, we're not going to be afraid. Spencer and Katharine are small little pictures on the poster, and the lovers are front and center. So we wake up, we learn, and we grow. And that's part of the story of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
So I guess the larger question of the film's legacy having been settled, like it was embraced by audiences. It was nominated for more than half a dozen Oscars, right? It was fairly well received.
I think it was like 10 Oscars. I'm not sure, but it won 2. I do know that.
Yeah. And Hepburn, obviously.
And the scriptwriter, Bill Rose. Both of them won Oscars.
Yeah. And it's, I guess it's not surprising that Tracy won. It's not surprising that Tracy was nominated for Best Actor and Poitier wasn't, because in a weird way, Poitier is perceived to have the easiest role, right? He just sails through the film and it's everybody else who has to struggle and grow and change.
Yeah.
But
also, he had In the Heat of the Night in the same year. I mean,
that's true.
Remember, if you remember 1967, it was The Graduate, it was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, it's in the Heat of the Night. What am I forgetting? But anyway, there was a lot of competition. I mean, there's a lot
Bonnie
of
and Clyde,
for those acting roles. Yeah,
Bonnie and Clyde
kind of one of the turning point years. So Sydney probably could have won for In the Heat of the Night. But here they are in the same year, because that's when actors used to do several movies in a year. And I think probably people would think In the Heat of the Night is a showier, better role for him anyway.
Yeah, and incredibly, because he's perceived as the supporting actor there, he didn't even get nominated.
Oh, those nominations are always something, aren't they?
Yeah, I just, you know what? I've made this resolution. I only care about him when a friend is nominated, and that's happened like once, so it's fine. She did win, but
well, I care about them when they really recognize a movie I love. Like in 1969, when I was a young man, and Midnight Cowboy was nominated. I had snuck into a theater to see Midnight Cowboy, and it blew me away. That was my second choice for movies to talk about, by the way. It was so incredible to me, and it's formed my whole cinematic universe is from seeing Midnight Cowboy. And so I was really thrilled that was nominated. It's never going to win. This is an X-rated movie. At that time, X-rated, it's not going to make it to the top. And when it won, I think Elizabeth Taylor announced it, as I remember, it blew me away. And I was so, so happy that it had risen to the top of the heap. I will feel the same way if Sinners does the same this year, but that's another conversation.
I mean, it would be great if it happens.
I don't think it will, but it would be great.
I want to be surprised. Parasite could do it. Maybe Sinners can do it too.
I'm not holding my breath on that one.
I don't know. We're at a place where they finally achieved the diversity and expansion and youth membership in the Academy that they've been trying to do for 10 years. Maybe finally they'll respond to it.
Yeah, but I think One Battle speaks to that too, not to get on a sidetrack, but it does sort of speak to a lot of those issues too. So it sort of divides the audience of original, relevant, cool filmmaking people, and then you have to make a choice. What is grander?
Yeah, I wonder. I love them both. Yeah, Secret Agent's still my favorite movie last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that I haven't seen, but it's because I'm behind. I work.
You're busy. It's fine.
I'm busy.
I mean, that actually gets us to pivot to what you're ostensibly here to talk about, which is with the Billy Preston documentary, which is happening. Like his career. I always try to figure out how to connect the film people choose to the work that they're currently doing or they're about to be doing. We've sort of already covered that with the miniseries, but at the same time, as Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is taking place, Billy Preston is happening.
Yeah,
right? Like he's emerging,
just growing and emerging. I mean, in the early 60s, he was, playing in Little Richard's band. And in Hamburg, they opened for this little group, this scraggly group called the Beatles. And Billy Preston befriended them. And this is all a part of the film that you'll see, and gave them meals. And because the headliner could get free food, apparently, and did all those things. And eventually, a couple of years after this movie, Billy finds his way back to Abbey Road and helps the Beatles get over one of the toughest times, or maybe the toughest time they'd ever had. And so he played a fundamental role in musical history there by being just himself, or at least a version of himself, which became really interesting. So, yeah, I got talked into doing this movie by Stephanie Elaine, who's the producer of Boys in the Hood and Hustle and Flow, and is a great friend of mine. And I hadn't done a feature documentary before. I'd done some short documentaries, and I wasn't sure I was the right person until I got into Billy Preston's life. And the more I got into it, the more interested I became in the stuff that he not only did, but what he didn't say and the secrets that he held. And that became like a seminal sort of mystery for me. I mean, not only why was he so talented, and why could he play with Aretha Franklin, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Ray Charles, all the way through Barbra Streisand and Elton John, and still people don't know him, and still he hasn't really made a mark in the collective musical consciousness. Why is that? What was going on there? So we delve into that in the movie, and we have an answer, which I won't spoil for you today.
I'll hold it back as well. But the way the material is presented and the way that the film circles that answer, let's say, like it's present, it's constant, it's always there, it's just outside the frame. And again, I won't spoil it either, but to be someone like Billy Preston in the 1960s, in the time that produced a film like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where that was presumed to be risky and edgy, even though it's, pretty clean, it's designed to be inoffensive, it's designed to introduce concepts that are heady and charged, but it diffuses them by the end of the film with a genuinely earned happy ending. And to be someone like Billy Preston, who is making radical art, and like the guy's a polymath, he's an incredible musician. The footage of him as a kid is stunning. Just first of all, that it exists at all.
There's some digging sometimes.
No kidding. But that he is as good as he is right from the jump. Stevie Wonder is being hailed as this incredible composer, performer, singer, all of it. And Preston is doing something, I think he basically invents funk around 1968, and no one gives him any credit for it.
No, he doesn't get credit for a lot of things, but what he did was just channel his gospel upbringing and his, sort of innate soulfulness. He's always looking to God, and he's always looking towards his faith as his guide. And it seemed to sort of help, like the light shining on him, this music pour out of his fingertips. The struggle came when who he was and his identity was in question, because many people say he's a gay man. Some people are not so sure, but his difficulties dealing with his sexuality and his faith created this friction, which I think is one of the reasons why he's a great artist, but also one of the reasons why he didn't achieve the greatness that we believe he deserved, is because he never could be authentic. And what you always saw was a version of Billy Preston that Billy Preston wanted you to see. And so doing a documentary about that is we had to show you the Billy Preston that he put out there, and the Billy Preston that shakes his hips with the Rolling Stones, and the Billy Preston that comes in and saves the Beatles. But we also had to dig by going back to his friends and some of the people who've known him the longest to find out what was really behind that smile. And there's a lot of tragedy there that he dealt with. But I still think if you see the film, you'll understand that our view of the tragedy is, there's a bubbling below the surface of pain that he managed to continue to eclipse with joy.
Yeah.
The joy of his musical spirit.
It never feels like we're watching a tragedy. I mean, until the end, when of course he died far too young. But it doesn't, his music is just incredibly celebratory. And I guess that's the gospel underpinnings, right? Like there's
an effervescence to it that he keeps and that he shares openly with other people and helps them to, to bubble up or squabble up or whatever it is. It helps them to bring what they've got to the fore. He's a source of electricity. And as such, there's something beautiful about him. And we originally were going to call this "You Are So Beautiful," which is a song that he wrote. Mm-hmm. But when we discovered that's the way God planned it, it played such a central role in his sort of psyche. He's always said, everything that happens for me is the way that God planned it. That became very interesting because we wanted the viewer to ask when they see this movie, what is that? All God's plan?
Yeah. What
do you think?
Yeah. Well, the conflict between who we are and who we want to be and who we think we should be. Like, I don't think anybody ever gets to resolve that. Not really, but you can come close. And weirdly enough, and I didn't mean to do this, but I just realized that is the whole point of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, right? Like these liberal parents who've brought their daughter up to love anyone have to kind of recheck their own biases when they realize maybe like that's the thing that they never say, but it's in the performances between Hepburn and Tracy is like, did we do our job too well? And it's great because every parent hopes their kid will be better, right? Like move forward.
And I can tie it back if we're in the tying mode, I'll continue to tie.
I guess
the thing about Billy Preston that's also similar to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is every advantage is there ostensibly for him to be accepted by everyone. I mean, he is like John Prentice, pretty perfect. I mean, there's nothing he can't play. There's no genre of music he's not at home with, from country to classical to rock to everything. And yet he still can't get his ultimate goal, which is to be himself and to be accepted for who he is. And while I think they begrudgingly say, you love her and therefore we won't stand in the way of this marriage, I don't quite think that's acceptance. I think that's not standing in the way. which is a little bit different. I mean, with Billy, if he had gotten sort of the feeling that he would be accepted, whether he was gay, whatever was troubling him, that it would be okay, that there would be true tolerance, especially from his church, I think his story would be very different. And so I'm always looking for stories of tolerance, and I'm always looking for stories that don't preach, but send a message of acceptance. And I think that's something both of these have in common. There's the road to acceptance is a rocky road, but try to get there.
My thanks to Paris Barclay, whose new documentary, Billy Preston, That's the Way God Planned It, kicks off its theatrical engagement this Friday, February 20th, at Film Forum in New York. Thanks also to Stephen Beeman. He knows what he did. You can find Paris on Instagram at PKCBarclay, all one word, and you can keep an eye on his movie's release at billyprestonfilm.com. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is available on Blu-ray and DVD from Sony Pictures Home Entertainment, and it's available on 4K in Volume 4 of the Columbia Classics 4K Ultra HD collection. The film is also streaming on Xumo Play in the US and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 40 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, get all the boosters. I'll see you next week.